Question 1. Performance analysis shows a significant increase in the utilization of a newly approved telehealth service for chronic disease management. While this service presents a new revenue stream, the coding and billing guidelines for telehealth are complex and subject to frequent updates by CMS. To effectively manage the associated revenue integrity risks, which of the following approaches best aligns with developing a comprehensive risk management framework for this scenario? Option A. Establish a dedicated cross-functional team to proactively identify potential coding and billing vulnerabilities related to the new telehealth service. Conduct a thorough risk assessment considering the likelihood and impact of noncompliance with CMS guidelines, and develop targeted mitigation strategies, including updated training and enhanced auditing protocols, with ongoing monitoring of claim submission patterns and denial rates. Option B. Rely on the existing coding and billing staff to incorporate the new telehealth service into their daily workflows, assuming they will naturally adapt to the evolving guidelines as they arise through routine claim processing and denial management. Option C. Immediately implement aggressive billing strategies to maximize revenue from the new telehealth service, deferring any formal risk assessment or compliance review until after a significant volume of claims has been processed and revenue targets are met. Option D. Conduct a retrospective audit of claims submitted for the new telehealth service only after a full year of operation, focusing solely on identifying any significant overpayments that may have occurred, and then implement corrective actions based on those findings. The correct answer is A. Establish a dedicated cross-functional team to proactively identify potential coding and billing vulnerabilities related to the new telehealth service. Conduct a thorough risk assessment considering the likelihood and impact of noncompliance with CMS guidelines, and develop targeted mitigation strategies, including updated training and enhanced auditing protocols, with ongoing monitoring of claim submission patterns and denial rates. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in revenue integrity, identifying and mitigating risks associated with evolving coding and billing practices, particularly when new technologies or services are introduced. The professional challenge lies in proactively establishing a robust risk management framework that aligns with the specific regulatory requirements of the Certified Revenue Integrity Professional (CRIP) exam, which is grounded in U.S. federal healthcare regulations, primarily Medicare and Medicaid. This requires a deep understanding of the False Claims Act, Anti-Kickback Statute, and the Office of Inspector General's OIG compliance program guidance, as well as the specific coding and billing rules governed by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS. The correct approach involves a systematic, multifaceted strategy that prioritizes risk identification, assessment, and mitigation in a structured and documented manner. This aligns with best professional practice by demonstrating a commitment to compliance and preventing improper payments. Specifically, it involves 1. Establishing clear policies and procedures for identifying new service risks. 2. Conducting thorough risk assessments that consider the likelihood and impact of noncompliance. 3. Developing and implementing targeted mitigation strategies. And 4. Establishing ongoing monitoring and auditing processes to ensure the effectiveness of controls. This approach directly addresses the core principles of effective compliance programs as outlined by the OIG and CMS, aiming to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on reactive measures, such as only addressing issues identified through audits or patient complaints, fails to meet the proactive requirements of a comprehensive risk management framework. This represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure because it implies a lack of commitment to preventing noncompliance and could lead to substantial financial penalties and reputational damage. Such an approach ignores the fundamental principle of due diligence in healthcare compliance. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of a few key personnel without a structured assessment process is also professionally unacceptable. This lacks the objectivity and rigor required for effective risk management and can lead to misallocation of resources or overlooking critical risks. It fails to provide a defensible basis for compliance efforts and does not meet the standard of care expected of a revenue integrity professional. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes revenue maximization over compliance, or vice versa, without a balanced consideration of both, is ethically and regulatorily unsound. Revenue integrity professionals must operate within the bounds of federal healthcare laws and regulations. A framework that solely focuses on increasing revenue without robust compliance controls is inherently risky and can lead to violations of the False Claims Act. Conversely, a framework that is so risk-averse that it stifles legitimate billing practices is also detrimental. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the specific regulatory landscape, e.g., CMS guidelines, OIG guidance. 2. Identifying potential risk areas based on operational changes, new services, or evolving payer policies. 3. Conducting a formal risk assessment that quantifies the potential impact and likelihood of noncompliance. 4. Developing and implementing targeted mitigation strategies with clear ownership and timelines. And 5. Establishing a continuous monitoring and auditing program to validate the effectiveness of controls and adapt to new risks. This systematic approach ensures that resources are allocated effectively and that the organization maintains a strong compliance posture. Question 2. System analysis indicates a need to improve the organization's ability to collect revenue for services rendered. The Chief Financial Officer, CFO, has requested a single primary key performance indicator, KPI, that best reflects the organization's success in this area, emphasizing immediate financial impact. Which of the following KPIs, when considered in isolation, will be the most appropriate for the CFO's stated objective, while still maintaining a foundational understanding of revenue integrity principles? Option A, days in accounts receivable. Option B, net collection rate. Option C, gross revenue. Option D, clean claim rate. The correct answer is D, clean claim rate. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial pressures of a healthcare organization with the long-term imperative of accurate revenue capture and compliance, as mandated by U.S. federal regulations governing healthcare billing and reimbursement. The Chief Financial Officer, CFO, is seeking a metric that directly reflects the organization's ability to collect revenue for services rendered, but a narrow focus on this single metric, without considering its underlying drivers, can lead to misinterpretations and potentially non-compliant practices. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it focuses on a comprehensive metric that reflects the efficiency and effectiveness of the entire revenue cycle, from patient registration to final payment. Key performance indicators, KPI, that encompass denial rates, clean claim rates, and days in accounts receivable provide a holistic view of revenue cycle health. This aligns with the principles of revenue integrity, which emphasizes accurate coding, billing, and claims submission to prevent overpayments and underpayments, thereby ensuring compliance with regulations like the False Claims Act and the Anti-Kickback Statute. Focusing on these broader metrics encourages a proactive approach to identifying and resolving systemic issues that impact revenue collection, rather than simply reacting to lagging indicators. An incorrect approach that solely focuses on the days in accounts receivable metric is professionally unacceptable due to several regulatory and ethical failures. While a lower days in a /R can indicate faster payment, it doesn't inherently guarantee that payments are correct or compliant. Provider could artificially lower this metric by aggressively writing off uncollectible accounts, even if those accounts were legitimately owed, or by accepting incorrect payments to close out accounts quickly. This could lead to underreporting of revenue and potential violations of principles of accurate financial reporting. Furthermore, focusing only on days in a /R might incentivize staff to prioritize speed over accuracy in claim submission and follow-up, increasing the risk of errors that could result in overpayments, which are reportable under the Medicare Secondary Payer (MSP) provisions and could lead to False Claims Act liability if not promptly returned. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes a high net collection rate without considering the gross charges or denial rates is also professionally flawed. High net collection rate can be achieved by writing off a significant portion of uncollectible or disputed charges, which masks underlying issues in the revenue cycle. This can lead to a distorted view of the organization's true financial performance and may indicate a failure to pursue legitimate revenue. Ethically, it can be seen as a way to present a more favorable financial picture than reality, potentially misleading stakeholders. From a regulatory standpoint, could indicate a failure to properly manage accounts receivable and pursue all legitimate reimbursements, which could have implications for compliance with payer contracts and federal program rules. A third incorrect approach that focuses solely on gross revenue is professionally unacceptable because it is a vanity metric that does not reflect actual cash collected or the efficiency of the revenue cycle. Gross revenue is the total amount billed before any adjustments, discounts, or denials. Focusing on this metric alone can create a false sense of financial success while ignoring significant revenue leakage. This can lead to a lack of attention to crucial revenue integrity processes, such as accurate coding and billing, which are essential for compliance with Medicare and Medicaid regulations. A failure to address denial management and underpayments, which are not reflected in gross revenue, can result in significant financial losses and potential noncompliance with payer requirements. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the organization's strategic financial goals, coupled with a deep knowledge of applicable U.S. healthcare regulations and revenue cycle best practices. Professionals should advocate for KPIs that provide a balanced perspective, measuring both efficiency and accuracy. This involves understanding the interdependencies between different stages of the revenue cycle and how improvements in one area can impact others. When presented with a request for a single metric, it is crucial to educate stakeholders on the limitations of such an approach and to propose a suite of KPIs that offer a more comprehensive and compliant view of revenue cycle performance. This proactive educational approach helps prevent the adoption of metrics that could inadvertently lead to non-compliance or financial misrepresentation. Question 3. Analysis of a scenario where a physician documents a complex procedure and assigns a specific CPT code. A revenue integrity professional is tasked with reviewing the claim prior to submission. The physician's documentation clearly supports the procedure performed, but the assigned CPT code, when cross-referenced with Medicare's National Correct Coding Initiative, NCCI edits, appears to be bundled with another service also documented and billed on the same date of service. What is the most appropriate course of action for the revenue integrity professional to ensure regulatory compliance and accurate billing? Option A. Bill the bundled CPT code only, omitting the second service entirely, to avoid potential audit findings related to NCCI edits, even if the second service was medically necessary and documented. Option B. Advise the physician to remove the second documented service from the patient's record to eliminate the NCCI edit conflict, thereby simplifying the billing process. Option C. Proceed with billing the assigned CPT code as documented by the physician, assuming the physician has the ultimate authority on coding decisions for their services. Option D. Query the physician for clarification on the coding intent and review Medicare's NCCI edits for any applicable modifiers or exceptions that would permit separate billing of the bundled services, ensuring the documentation fully supports any deviation from standard bundling rules. The correct answer is D. Query the physician for clarification on the coding intent and review Medicare's NCCI edits for any applicable modifiers or exceptions that would permit separate billing of the bundled services, ensuring the documentation fully supports any deviation from standard bundling rules. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in revenue integrity, ensuring accurate billing for services rendered while adhering to complex Medicare regulations. The professional challenge lies in interpreting the nuances of coding guidelines and payer policies to prevent overpayments and underpayments, both of which carry significant compliance risks. A revenue integrity professional must possess a deep understanding of the billing lifecycle, from documentation to claim submission, and be adept at identifying potential discrepancies. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the patient's medical record, the physician's documentation, and the applicable current procedural terminology, CPT, codes and Medicare's National Correct Coding Initiative, NCCI, edits. This meticulous process ensures that the services billed are supported by documentation, are medically necessary, and are coded in accordance with all payer requirements, thereby preventing improper payments and maintaining compliance with the False Claims Act and other anti-fraud statutes. An incorrect approach of simply accepting the physician's initial coding without independent verification fails to uphold the revenue integrity professional's responsibility. This oversight can lead to billing for services not rendered or not medically necessary, constituting a violation of Medicare's billing rules and potentially leading to recoupments, fines, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, that of prioritizing revenue maximization over compliance, directly contravenes ethical and regulatory obligations. This can result in aggressive billing practices that may be non-compliant exposing the organization to significant financial and legal penalties. A third incorrect approach, focusing solely on the patient's stated desire for a service without confirming medical necessity and appropriate coding, ignores the payer's requirements and the professional's duty to ensure accurate billing. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that begins with understanding the specific service and its associated documentation. This is followed by a comprehensive review of coding guidelines, payer policies, and NCCI edits. If any discrepancies or ambiguities arise, the professional should consult relevant resources, seek clarification from coding experts or compliance officers, and err on the side of caution to ensure compliance. The ultimate goal is to balance efficient revenue cycle management with unwavering adherence to regulatory mandates. Question 4. Operational review demonstrates a consistent pattern of underpayments and claim denials related to outpatient diagnostic services. Initial investigation reveals that while patient registration appears accurate and coding for the services rendered is generally correct, a significant number of claims are being submitted with incomplete or inaccurate procedure codes that do not fully reflect the complexity or components of the services performed. This issue appears to stem from a disconnect between the clinical documentation of the service and the information captured by the ancillary department responsible for initiating the billing process. Which of the following approaches best addresses the root cause of this revenue integrity issue? Option A. Implement enhanced post-submission claim edits and denial management protocol to identify and correct billing errors before they impact reimbursement. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the charge capture process within ancillary departments, focusing on the integration of clinical documentation with the information used to generate billing charges, and retrain staff on accurate charge entry. Option C. Focus on improving the accuracy of patient demographic and insurance information captured during the initial registration process to reduce eligibility-related denials. Option D. Increase the frequency of coding audits for outpatient diagnostic services to ensure greater accuracy in the assignment of ICD-10-CM and CPT codes. The correct answer is A. Implement enhanced post-submission claim edits and denial management protocols to identify and correct billing errors before they impact reimbursement. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in revenue integrity, identifying and rectifying systemic issues that impact accurate billing and reimbursement rather than isolated errors. The professional challenge lies in moving beyond superficial fixes to address the root causes within the revenue cycle's key components. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between a simple data entry mistake and a fundamental process breakdown that could lead to widespread compliance issues and financial loss. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the core components of the revenue cycle as defined by U.S. healthcare regulations and industry standards relevant to CRIP certification. Specifically, it focuses on the patient registration, charge capture, and coding processes, which are foundational to accurate billing. By analyzing the workflow from patient encounter through claim submission, this approach ensures that all potential points of revenue leakage or compliance risk are examined. This aligns with the principles of the False Claims Act and the Medicare Conditions of Participation, which mandate accurate billing and documentation. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on post-billing edits or denial management fails to address the upstream issues. While denial management is crucial, it is a reactive measure. If the root cause of denials lies in flawed charge capture or incorrect coding during the initial encounter, simply managing denials will not prevent future occurrences and may indicate a failure to implement robust internal controls, potentially violating the Medicare program integrity requirements. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes front-end registration improvements without examining charge capture or coding overlooks critical downstream revenue integrity points. While accurate registration is important for eligibility and insurance verification, it does not guarantee that services rendered are correctly identified and billed. This could lead to under-reimbursement or missed revenue opportunities, and potentially non-compliance if services are billed incorrectly due to a lack of integration with downstream processes. A third incorrect approach that concentrates only on coding accuracy without considering the preceding charge capture process is also flawed. Coding is vital, but if the charges submitted for coding are incomplete or inaccurate due to issues in the charge capture system or workflow, even perfect coding will result in incorrect billing. This highlights a failure to implement a comprehensive revenue integrity program that spans the entire revenue cycle, potentially leading to violations of billing regulations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic end-to-end review of the revenue cycle. This begins with understanding the patient journey from scheduling and registration, through service delivery and charge capture, to coding, claim submission, payment posting, and denial management. Professionals should utilize data analytics to identify trends and patterns of errors. Investigate the root causes of these trends by examining specific processes and workflows, and then implement targeted corrective actions that address systemic issues. Continuous monitoring and auditing are essential to ensure the effectiveness of these actions and maintain ongoing revenue integrity and compliance. Question 5. Market research demonstrates that a particular diagnostic test, while not explicitly listed as a covered service for a specific patient demographic under Medicare Part B, is frequently ordered by physicians in a particular specialty for patients presenting with a constellation of symptoms that, anecdotally, often resolve after the test. The billing department receives a high volume of requests to bill this test to Medicare Part B, with the justification that it is medically necessary for these symptomatic patients. As a certified revenue integrity professional CRIP, you are tasked with determining the appropriate billing protocol for this test. Option A. Bill the test to Medicare Part B, but only after obtaining a specific waiver from each patient acknowledging the potential non-coverage, as this shifts the financial risk to the patient and fulfills the provider's obligation to attempt billing. Option B. Refrain from billing the test to Medicare Part B and instead advise the provider to seek alternative coverage or patient payment, as the test is not explicitly listed as a covered service for this demographic, and billing without clear coverage could violate Medicare program integrity rules. Option C. Bill the test to Medicare Part B for all patients presenting with the specified symptoms, provided the physician documents the symptoms and their belief in the test's necessity, as this aligns with physician practice patterns and patient outcomes. Option D. Bill the test to Medicare Part B, but apply for a new coverage determination from Medicare for this specific indication, and in the interim, bill the test to Medicare Part B with a modifier indicating it is a medically necessary experimental service, as this acknowledges the evolving nature of medical practice. The correct answer is C. Bill the test to Medicare Part B for all patients presenting with the specified symptoms, provided the physician documents the symptoms and their belief in the test's necessity, as this aligns with physician practice patterns and patient outcomes. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a provider's desire to maximize revenue and the strict requirements of Medicare and Medicaid regulations designed to ensure appropriate billing and prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. The pressure to meet financial targets can create an environment where ethical boundaries are tested, requiring careful judgment and a deep understanding of compliance obligations. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to Medicare and Medicaid regulations, specifically the principles of medical necessity and accurate coding. By seeking clarification from the physician and ensuring documentation supports the services rendered and their medical necessity, the revenue integrity professional upholds the integrity of the billing process and avoids potential violations of the False Claims Act and other anti-fraud statutes. This proactive stance demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance, safeguarding the organization from financial penalties and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that involves billing for services without sufficient documentation or medical necessity justification represents a direct violation of Medicare and Medicaid program integrity rules. This could lead to accusations of upcoding, unbundling, or billing for services not rendered, all of which are considered fraudulent. Such actions undermine the trust placed in healthcare providers by government programs and can result in severe consequences, including recoupment of payments, civil monetary penalties, and exclusion from participation in federal healthcare programs. Another incorrect approach, such as ignoring the discrepancy and proceeding with billing based on the initial request, demonstrates a failure to exercise due diligence and a disregard for compliance responsibilities. This passive acceptance of potentially improper billing practices can be interpreted as complicity in fraudulent activities, It neglects the professional obligation to ensure the accuracy and legitimacy of all claims submitted to federal healthcare programs. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. 1. Identify the potential compliance issue. Recognize when a request or practice deviates from established regulatory requirements or ethical standards. 2. Gather information. Seek all relevant documentation and context surrounding the issue. 3. Consult relevant regulations and guidelines. Thoroughly review Medicare and Medicaid rules, coding manuals, and program integrity guidance. 4. Engage in open communication. Discuss concerns with the involved parties, such as physicians or other clinicians, to gain understanding and seek clarification. 5. Document all actions and decisions. Maintain a clear record of the investigation, consultations, and the rationale for the final decision. 6. Escalate if necessary. If consensus cannot be reached or the issue remains unresolved, involve compliance officers or legal counsel. 7. Prioritize compliance and ethical conduct. Always ensure that decisions align with regulatory mandates and the highest ethical standards, even if it impacts revenue. Question 6. Research into a healthcare organization's revenue cycle reveals a significant increase in denials related to incomplete documentation for services rendered in the outpatient surgery department. The Revenue Integrity Team suspects that charges are being submitted before all necessary operative reports and physician notes are finalized, leading to claims being rejected by payers. Which of the following approaches best addresses this revenue integrity challenge? Option A. Focus on appealing denied claims for outpatient surgery services, prioritizing those with the highest dollar amounts without altering the current charge submission process. Option B. Implement a mandatory hold on all outpatient surgery charges until the complete operative report and physician documentation are uploaded into the electronic health record and verified by him. Option C. Increase the number of billing staff to expedite the processing of all outpatient surgery charges, assuming documentation will be retroactively obtained. Option D. Advise the outpatient surgery department to submit charges as soon as the procedure is completed, regardless of the status of the operative report, to avoid delays in cash flow. The correct answer is B. Implement a mandatory hold on all outpatient surgery charges until the complete operative report and physician documentation are uploaded into the electronic health record and verified by him. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in revenue integrity, ensuring accurate and compliant charge capture across multiple departments, particularly when dealing with complex services and varying documentation practices. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need for timely and complete charge submission with the strict requirements of accurate coding and documentation, all while adhering to payer-specific guidelines and preventing revenue leakage or overpayments. Careful judgment is required to identify systemic issues rather than isolated errors, and to implement sustainable solutions. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it involves a systematic, data-driven review of the entire revenue cycle, focusing on the critical intersection of charge capture and claims management. By analyzing denial trends, identifying root causes of undercharging or incorrect coding, and implementing targeted education and process improvements, this approach directly addresses the core principles of revenue integrity. It prioritizes compliance with regulations such as the Medicare conditions of participation and payer contracts, ensuring that all submitted claims are accurate, supported by documentation, and reflect services actually rendered, thereby preventing both overpayments and underpayments. This proactive and comprehensive strategy is essential for maintaining financial health and regulatory compliance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on increasing charge submission volume without regard for accuracy or documentation fails to uphold regulatory requirements. This could lead to claims being denied for lack of medical necessity or insufficient documentation, resulting in increased accounts receivable and potential recoupments. It also violates the ethical obligation to submit accurate claims. Another incorrect approach that involves manual correction of charges without investigating the underlying cause of errors neglects the opportunity for systemic improvement. This reactive measure does not address the root issues in registration, charge capture, or documentation, leading to recurring problems and continued revenue integrity vulnerabilities. Furthermore, an approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness in charge review can result in missed opportunities for accurate coding and documentation, leading to undercharging and revenue loss, which is also a failure in revenue integrity. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the payer's specific requirements and the organization's internal policies. This involves regularly reviewing denial reports and accounts receivable aging to identify patterns and trends. Root cause analysis is crucial, moving beyond simply identifying errors to understanding why they occur. This often requires collaboration across departments, including HIM, billing, clinical areas, and IT. Implementing corrective actions should be data-driven and focused on sustainable process improvements and ongoing education, rather than one-time fixes. Regular audits and performance monitoring are essential to ensure the effectiveness of implemented changes and to adapt to evolving regulatory landscapes. Question 7. The audit findings indicate a significant increase in underpayments from a major payer over the past quarter, impacting the organization's revenue targets. The audit report suggests potential issues with the current claims follow-up process and staff training on payer-specific billing rules. Management is pressuring the revenue cycle team to quickly resolve this to meet financial goals. Which of the following actions best upholds the principles of revenue integrity and professional ethics in this situation? Option A. Immediately implement a policy to write off all identified underpayments below a certain dollar threshold to reduce the backlog and improve immediate financial metrics. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive review of the claims follow-up process, including staff training needs and payer policy adherence, to identify and rectify the root causes of the underpayments before implementing any broad corrective actions. Option C. Focus solely on increasing the volume of claims worked by the follow-up team, assuming that higher productivity will naturally lead to resolving the underpayment issue. Option D. Prioritize appealing only the largest underpayment amounts, as these represent the most significant financial impact, and deferring action on smaller amounts to conserve resources. The correct answer is B. Initiate a comprehensive review of the claims follow-up process, including staff training needs and payer policy adherence, to identify and rectify the root causes of the underpayments before implementing any broad corrective actions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate financial pressures of a healthcare organization with the ethical and regulatory obligations to ensure accurate billing and patient financial responsibility. The revenue cycle professional must navigate potential conflicts of interest and maintain integrity in the face of pressure to meet financial targets. Careful judgment is required to uphold compliance standards while addressing operational inefficiencies. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough investigation of the root cause of the revenue cycle breakdown. This aligns with the Certified Revenue Integrity Professional (CRIP) core principles, which emphasize accuracy, compliance, and ethical conduct in revenue management. By focusing on identifying and rectifying systemic issues, such as inadequate training or process gaps, the professional demonstrates a commitment to long-term revenue integrity and patient fairness, rather than resorting to superficial or potentially non-compliant solutions. This proactive and investigative stance is crucial for preventing future errors and ensuring adherence to regulations like the False Claims Act and Medicare/Medicaid billing guidelines, which mandate accurate reporting of services and charges. An incorrect approach that involves immediately implementing a blanket policy to write off all identified underpayments without investigating the cause is professionally unacceptable. This fails to address the underlying revenue cycle deficiencies, potentially leading to continued underpayments and missed revenue opportunities. Ethically, it could be seen as a way to mask operational problems rather than solve them. From a regulatory standpoint, it might violate principles of proper financial stewardship and accurate reporting if the underpayments are due to billing errors that should be corrected. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on increasing staff productivity metrics without addressing the quality of their work or the complexity of the tasks, is also professionally unsound. This can lead to rushed work, increased errors, and burnout, ultimately undermining revenue integrity. It prioritizes quantity over quality, which is antithetical to the goals of revenue integrity and can result in non-compliance with billing regulations due to inaccuracies. A third incorrect approach, which involves selectively appealing only the most significant underpayments while ignoring smaller ones, is problematic. While resource allocation is important, a consistent and fair approach to revenue recovery is essential. Ignoring smaller underpayments, even if individually less impactful, can represent a pattern of non-compliance and a failure to diligently pursue all legitimate revenue. This selective approach could be viewed as a deviation from best practices in revenue cycle management and may not align with payer contracts or regulatory expectations for consistent claim adjudication. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. 1. Acknowledge and investigate audit findings thoroughly. 2. Identify the root cause of the identified revenue cycle issues. 3. Evaluate potential solutions based on their compliance, ethical implications, and long-term effectiveness. 4. Consult relevant regulations, payer policies, and organizational policies. 5. Develop and implement corrective actions that address systemic problems. 6. Monitor the effectiveness of implemented solutions and make adjustments as needed. 7. Maintain open communication with relevant stakeholders, including management, billing staff, and compliance officers. Question 8. Governance review demonstrates a potential disconnect between departmental revenue targets and the organization's commitment to accurate and compliant billing for federal healthcare programs. Which of the following best defines the core principle of revenue integrity within the U.S. healthcare regulatory framework and its importance for certified revenue integrity professionals, CRIP? Option A. Revenue integrity is the systematic review of payer contracts to identify any discrepancies in payment terms and to negotiate more favorable reimbursement rates. Option B. Revenue integrity is the practice of ensuring that all healthcare services are billed accurately, compliantly, and in accordance with all applicable federal laws and regulations, including those governing medical necessity and documentation, to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. Option C. Revenue integrity is the process of maximizing departmental revenue by meeting or exceeding established financial targets, with compliance being a secondary consideration. Option D. Revenue integrity is primarily focused on optimizing reimbursement rates by identifying all billable services and ensuring that coding is as aggressive as possible within industry standards. The correct answer is B. Revenue integrity is the practice of ensuring that all healthcare services are billed accurately, compliantly, and in accordance with all applicable federal laws and regulations, including those governing medical necessity and documentation, to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in revenue integrity, balancing the need for accurate financial reporting with the complexities of healthcare regulations. The professional challenge lies in interpreting and applying the specific requirements of the Certified Revenue Integrity Professional CRIP framework, which is rooted in U.S. federal healthcare regulations, to ensure that all claims submitted to federal healthcare programs are both medically necessary and correctly coded. This requires a deep understanding of the False Claims Act, the Anti-Kickback Statute, and the specific billing and coding guidelines issued by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the core principles of revenue integrity as defined by U.S. healthcare regulations. Revenue integrity, in this context, is not merely about maximizing reimbursement, but about ensuring that payments received are for services that are legitimate, medically necessary, properly documented, and billed in accordance with all applicable laws and regulations. A proactive approach that involves cross-functional collaboration and a commitment to ongoing education and compliance is essential to prevent improper payments and potential fraud, waste, and abuse. This aligns with the fundamental ethical and legal obligations of healthcare providers to the government and its beneficiaries. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing revenue without regard for regulatory compliance is a direct violation of the False Claims Act. This act imposes significant penalties for knowingly submitting or causing to be submitted false or fraudulent claims for payment to the government. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes departmental goals over organizational compliance risks creating an environment where regulatory breaches can occur undetected, leading to potential audits, recoupments, and reputational damage. This demonstrates a failure to uphold the ethical duty of due diligence and a disregard for the principles of good governance. A third incorrect approach that neglects the importance of documentation and medical necessity ignores the foundational requirements for any claim to be considered valid under Medicare and Medicaid. Without proper documentation to support the services rendered and their medical necessity, claims are inherently suspect and can be deemed fraudulent. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant U.S. federal healthcare regulations. This involves identifying the specific requirements related to billing, coding, medical necessity, and documentation. Next, they should assess the current operational processes against these regulatory requirements to identify any gaps or areas of noncompliance. This assessment should involve collaboration with all relevant departments, including clinical, coding, billing, and compliance. The framework should then prioritize corrective actions based on the level of risk and potential impact, with a focus on implementing sustainable solutions that embed compliance into daily operations. Continuous monitoring, auditing, and education are critical components of this framework to ensure ongoing adherence to revenue integrity principles. Question 9. Which approach would be most effective in optimizing the clinical documentation improvement (CDI) process to ensure accurate coding and appropriate reimbursement while maintaining regulatory compliance? Option A. Implementing a systematic review process that cross-references clinical documentation with established coding guidelines and payer policies to identify opportunities for clarification and specificity that accurately reflect patient acuity and care provided. Option B. Relying primarily on software-generated alerts for potential documentation deficiencies and instructing physicians to address these alerts without further clinical validation or physician-led discussion. Option C. Developing automated queries for common diagnoses that are triggered by specific keywords in the medical record, without requiring physician review of the supporting clinical context. Option D. Focusing on identifying diagnoses with higher reimbursement rates and prompting physicians to document these conditions more frequently, regardless of the detailed clinical evidence in the chart. The correct answer is A. Implementing a systematic review process that cross-references clinical documentation with established coding guidelines and payer policies to identify opportunities for clarification and specificity that accurately reflect patient acuity and care provided. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in healthcare revenue integrity, balancing the need for accurate clinical documentation to support appropriate reimbursement with the ethical imperative to avoid upcoding or misrepresenting patient acuity. The pressure to meet financial targets can inadvertently lead to practices that compromise documentation integrity. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all documentation improvements are clinically justified and align with payer requirements and regulatory guidelines. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach focuses on a systematic review of clinical documentation against established coding guidelines and payer policies, with a specific emphasis on identifying opportunities to clarify or add specificity that accurately reflects the patient's condition and care provided. This aligns with the core principles of clinical documentation improvement, CDI, and revenue integrity, which mandate that documentation must be complete, accurate, and legally defensible. By ensuring that all proposed changes are clinically supported and directly linked to the patient's record, this approach upholds regulatory compliance, e.g., Medicare's conditions of participation, HIPAA privacy rules, and ethical standards by preventing fraudulent or misleading claims. It promotes a culture of accurate reporting and supports appropriate reimbursement based on actual services rendered. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves prioritizing the identification of diagnoses that carry higher reimbursement rates without a thorough review of the supporting clinical documentation. This directly violates the principle of accurate coding and documentation, as it risks upcoding and submitting claims that do not reflect the true severity of illness or complexity of care. Such a practice is ethically unsound and can lead to significant regulatory penalties, including recoupment of overpayments and potential False Claims Act violations. Another incorrect approach focuses on implementing blanket queries for common conditions without specific clinical indicators in the chart. This is inefficient and can burden clinicians with unnecessary requests, potentially leading to query fatigue and a disregard for legitimate queries. More importantly, it bypasses the critical step of clinical validation, which is essential for ensuring that documentation accurately reflects the patient's condition. This can result in inaccurate coding, and, consequently, improper reimbursement, which is a direct contravention of revenue integrity principles. A third incorrect approach involves solely relying on automated software flags for potential documentation gaps without physician review and clinical validation. While software can be a useful tool, it cannot replace the clinical judgment of a CDI professional or the physician's expertise. Over-reliance on automation without human oversight can lead to incorrect assumptions, missed nuances in patient care, and the generation of inappropriate queries or documentation changes, thereby compromising the integrity of the revenue cycle. Professional reasoning. Professionals in revenue integrity and CDI must adopt a data-driven, clinically focused, and ethically grounded approach. This involves understanding the interplay between clinical documentation, coding, payer policies, and regulatory requirements. When faced with scenarios requiring process optimization, the decision-making process should prioritize 1. Thorough review of the medical record for clinical accuracy and completeness. 2. Adherence to all applicable coding and billing guidelines. 3. Compliance with payer-specific policies and federal regulations. And 4. Clear, concise, and clinically justified communication with physicians. The goal is always to ensure that documentation accurately reflects the patient's condition and care, leading to appropriate reimbursement without compromising ethical standards or regulatory compliance. Question 10. The review process indicates that a revenue integrity analyst, while examining billing data for a specific patient encounter, inadvertently accessed a patient's medical record that contained sensitive mental health information. The analyst is not directly involved in the patient's care and does not have a legitimate need to access this specific portion of the record for their revenue integrity duties. The analyst is concerned about the potential implications of this unauthorized access for both patient privacy and their professional responsibilities. Option A. Inform the patient directly about the accidental access to their mental health information to ensure transparency and allow them to take any necessary steps. Option B. Continue the review of the billing data, assuming the access was a minor oversight and unlikely to cause harm, and make a note in the file to be more careful in the future. Option C. Delete the patient's record from the system to prevent any further unauthorized access and to ensure the privacy of the information. Option D. Immediately cease reviewing the patient's record, document the unauthorized access, and report the incident to the organization's privacy officer and compliance department for guidance and investigation. The correct answer is D. Immediately cease reviewing the patient's record, document the unauthorized access, and report the incident to the organization's privacy officer and compliance department for guidance and investigation. Explanation. The review process indicates a potential breach of HIPAA compliance and patient privacy, presenting a significant ethical and professional challenge. The challenge lies in balancing the need for accurate revenue integrity with the stringent requirements for protecting protected health information. 5. A healthcare professional in this situation must navigate complex regulations, ethical obligations to patients, and organizational policies. Careful judgment is required to avoid both regulatory penalties and damage to patient trust. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes patient privacy and regulatory compliance above all else. By immediately halting the review and consulting with the privacy officer, the professional demonstrates a commitment to upholding HIPAA privacy rule. This action ensures that any further review or data access is conducted in a manner that is fully compliant with the law and minimizes the risk of unauthorized disclosure of PHI. It also initiates a formal process for addressing potential breaches, which is a critical component of a robust compliance program. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the review without proper authorization or consultation would constitute a direct violation of the HIPAA privacy rule. This could lead to unauthorized access and disclosure of PHI, resulting in significant civil and criminal penalties for the individual and the organization. It also represents an ethical failure to protect patient confidentiality. Another incorrect approach, such as ignoring the potential issue or attempting to resolve it informally without involving the privacy officer, fails to address the seriousness of the potential breach and bypasses established compliance protocols. This can lead to a lack of proper documentation, investigation, and remediation, increasing the organization's vulnerability to future violations and reputational damage. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential compliance issues. Upon identification, the immediate next step should be to cease any activity that could exacerbate the issue. Then, consult with the designated compliance or privacy officer to understand the specific regulatory requirements and organizational policies applicable to the situation. This ensures that all actions taken are informed, documented, and aligned with legal and ethical obligations. Escalation to appropriate authorities within the organization is paramount when dealing with potential breaches of patient privacy. Question 11. The analysis reveals that a healthcare organization has recently signed a new payer contract with specific stipulations regarding the use of modifiers for certain outpatient services. The Revenue Integrity Team is tasked with ensuring that all claims submitted under this contract accurately reflect these modifier requirements to avoid denials and potential recoupments. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with the new payer contract's modifier requirements? Option A. Interpreting any ambiguous clauses regarding modifier usage in a manner that is most financially advantageous to the organization, without seeking clarification from the payer. Option B. Relying on the historical practice of modifier usage for similar services, assuming the new contract will follow established patterns. Option C. Conducting a thorough review of the payer contract's language pertaining to modifier usage, cross-referencing it with current coding guidelines and payer-specific policy documents, and then developing and implementing updated billing and coding protocols with staff training. Option D. Assigning the task of understanding and implementing modifier requirements to the most experienced billing staff member without formal documentation or cross-departmental review. The correct answer is C. Conducting a thorough review of the payer contract's language pertaining to modifier usage, cross-referencing it with current coding guidelines and payer-specific policy documents, and then developing and implementing updated billing and coding protocols with staff training. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because understanding payer contracts is fundamental to revenue integrity, and misinterpreting their terms can lead to significant financial losses and compliance issues. The complexity arises from the nuanced language, varying reimbursement methodologies, and specific requirements embedded within each contract. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all billing and claims submission processes align precisely with contractual obligations. Correct approach represents best professional practice because it involves a systematic and thorough review of the payer contract's key provisions, including reimbursement rates, coding guidelines, prior authorization requirements, and timely filing limits. This proactive and detailed understanding ensures that the organization is accurately reimbursed for services rendered, minimizes claim denials, and maintains compliance with the specific terms agreed upon with the payer. Adherence to these contractual terms is a direct reflection of the organization's commitment to revenue integrity and ethical billing practices, aligning with the core principles of the CRIP certification. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on historical billing patterns without verifying current contract terms is professionally unacceptable. This failure represents a significant regulatory and ethical lapse because it ignores the dynamic nature of payer agreements. Contracts are subject to change, and relying on outdated information can lead to billing errors, non-compliance with updated reimbursement policies, and potential recoupments by the payer. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the contractual obligations, which can result in financial penalties and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes maximizing revenue by interpreting ambiguous contract clauses in the organization's favor without seeking clarification from the payer is also professionally unacceptable. This approach violates ethical principles by potentially engaging in aggressive or misleading billing practices. It can lead to accusations of fraud or abuse as it deviates from the spirit and intent of the contract. Ethically, professionals are bound to act with integrity and transparency, and such interpretations undermine these core values. A third incorrect approach that involves delegating the entire contract review process to a single individual without establishing a cross-functional review team is professionally unsound. While individual expertise is valuable, payer contracts impact multiple departments, e.g., billing, coding, compliance, finance. A lack of collaborative review increases the risk of overlooking critical details or failing to implement necessary operational changes across the organization. This can lead to systemic compliance failures and revenue leakage, as different departments may operate under misinterpretations of the contract. Professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve establishing a clear protocol for contract review. This protocol should mandate a comprehensive, multidisciplinary approach, including legal counsel and compliance officers when necessary. It should emphasize understanding the contract's implications for all revenue cycle functions, documenting interpretations, and implementing ongoing monitoring to ensure continued adherence. When ambiguity exists, the professional standard is to proactively seek clarification from the payer, rather than making assumptions that could lead to non-compliance. Question 12. Governance review demonstrates a pattern of inconsistencies in claim submissions, specifically concerning the accuracy of diagnostic coding, the completeness of required documentation, and the timeliness of claim filing. These issues have resulted in both claim denials and potential underpayments, impacting the organization's revenue cycle. Which of the following actions best addresses these identified revenue integrity deficiencies? Option A. Instruct the coding and billing departments to manually review all outgoing claims for the next quarter, prioritizing the correction of any identified coding errors before submission. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive root cause analysis to identify the underlying reasons for coding inaccuracies, documentation gaps, and delayed submissions, and develop targeted corrective action plans based on these findings. Option C. Escalate the findings to the compliance officer for further investigation and potential disciplinary action against responsible staff members without immediate corrective action plans. Option D. Immediately implement a retrospective review of all claims submitted in the past 6 months to identify and correct any errors, focusing on recouping any identified underpayments. The correct answer is B. Initiate a comprehensive root cause analysis to identify the underlying reasons for coding inaccuracies, documentation gaps, and delayed submissions, and develop targeted corrective action plans based on these findings. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for accurate billing with the potential for systemic issues impacting revenue integrity. A revenue integrity professional must not only identify individual errors, but also understand their root causes and implement sustainable solutions. The pressure to meet financial targets can create a conflict, making it crucial to prioritize adherence to regulatory requirements and ethical billing practices over short-term revenue gains. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the identified deficiencies in accuracy, completeness, and timeliness, by initiating a comprehensive root cause analysis. This aligns with the core principles of revenue integrity, which mandate that claims submitted to payers are accurate, complete, and timely to ensure compliance with payer policies and federal regulations, such as those enforced by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, under the Social Security Act. By investigating the underlying reasons for the errors, the professional can implement targeted corrective actions, preventing recurrence and safeguarding the organization's financial health and reputation. This proactive and systematic approach is essential for maintaining program integrity and avoiding potential penalties. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on correcting the immediate errors without investigating the root cause fails to address the systemic issues that led to the inaccuracies. This is a regulatory failure because it does not prevent future noncompliance. It is an ethical failure as it perpetuates a cycle of errors, potentially leading to repeated overpayments or underpayments, which violates the principle of submitting truthful and accurate claims. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate revenue recovery by aggressively pursuing all identified discrepancies, even those with unclear payer adjudication, is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This can lead to submitting claims that are not supported by documentation or are not in compliance with payer guidelines, potentially constituting fraud or abuse. It demonstrates a disregard for the accuracy and completeness requirements, prioritizing financial gain over regulatory adherence. A further incorrect approach that involves delaying the reporting of identified errors to senior management until a complete resolution is found is also professionally unacceptable. While thoroughness is important, delaying communication can prevent timely intervention and broader organizational awareness of systemic problems. This can lead to continued noncompliance and increased risk of penalties. Best professional practice dictates transparent and timely communication of significant findings to enable informed decision-making and prompt corrective action. The Professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, accurately identify and quantify the revenue integrity issues. Second, conduct a thorough root cause analysis to understand the underlying systemic problems. Third, develop and implement targeted corrective actions. Fourth, monitor the effectiveness of these actions. And fifth, communicate findings and progress transparently to relevant stakeholders. This systematic process ensures that revenue integrity is maintained not just through individual error correction, but through sustainable process improvements. Question 13. Operational review demonstrates a discrepancy between the physician's documented diagnosis for a patient's encounter and the ICD-10-CM diagnosis code submitted for billing. The physician's note indicates shortness of breath, but the submitted code reflects a more general respiratory symptom. The operative report details a diagnostic bronchoscopy performed to investigate the cause of the shortness of breath. Which of the following actions best ensures accurate and compliant revenue integrity? Option A. Query the physician for clarification on the specific cause of the shortness of breath and review the diagnostic bronchoscopy report to determine if the procedure identified a definitive diagnosis that should be coded. Option B. Accept the submitted ICD-10-CM code as it represents a general symptom and is sufficient for billing purposes. Option C. Adjust the ICD-10-CM code to a more specific diagnosis based solely on the physician's initial order for the bronchoscopy, without further documentation review. Option D. Prioritize submitting a code that is likely to result in a higher reimbursement, even if it is not the most specific diagnosis supported by the documentation. The correct answer is A. Query the physician for clarification on the specific cause of the shortness of breath and review the diagnostic bronchoscopy report to determine if the procedure identified a definitive diagnosis that should be coded. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in revenue integrity where a discrepancy arises between the documented clinical service and the submitted medical codes. The professional challenge lies in accurately identifying the root cause of the discrepancy and ensuring compliance with coding guidelines and payer requirements, which directly impacts reimbursement and the organization's financial health. Misinterpretation of coding rules or clinical documentation can lead to underpayments, overpayments, and potential compliance violations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the patient's medical record, including physician documentation, nursing notes, and any ancillary service reports, to determine the most accurate and specific ICD-10-CM diagnosis code and CPT/HCPCS procedure code that reflects the services rendered. This aligns with the fundamental principles of medical coding, which mandate that codes must accurately represent the patient's condition and the services provided, as supported by the medical record. Adherence to official coding guidelines and payer-specific policies is paramount for ensuring compliant billing and appropriate reimbursement. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the physician's initial order without verifying if the service performed aligns with the final documentation, or if a more specific diagnosis or procedure was identified during the encounter. This fails to capture the full clinical picture and may lead to inaccurate coding, potentially resulting in an incorrect payment. Another incorrect approach would be to assume the submitted code is correct based on a general understanding of the service, without consulting the detailed medical record or official coding resources. This bypasses the essential step of validating the code against the documentation and established guidelines, increasing the risk of coding errors and compliance issues. A third incorrect approach would be to prioritize the reimbursement amount over the accuracy of the coding. This is a direct violation of ethical and regulatory standards, as the primary goal of coding is to accurately reflect patient care, not to manipulate billing for financial gain. Such an approach can lead to significant compliance penalties and reputational damage. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such discrepancies by initiating a systematic review process. This involves 1. Clearly identifying the specific service and diagnosis in question. 2. Retrieving and meticulously reviewing all relevant medical documentation. 3. Consulting the ICD-10-CM official guidelines for coding and reporting, and the CPT/HCPCS codebooks and associated addenda. 4. Comparing the documented services and diagnoses with the submitted codes. 5. If a discrepancy is found, determining the most accurate codes based on the documentation and guidelines. 6. Documenting the rationale for any code changes. 7. Escalating complex cases or those with significant financial implications to a coding supervisor or compliance officer. Question 14. During the evaluation of a hospital's revenue cycle management processes, a revenue integrity professional identifies a pattern where certain high-value procedures are consistently billed at a lower reimbursement rate than what appears to be supported by the medical record documentation and the assigned CPT codes. The team responsible for billing suggests that this is a deliberate strategy to avoid triggering payer audits, as higher reimbursement claims are more likely to be scrutinized. They argue that this approach ensures a smoother, less interrupted revenue flow. What is the most appropriate course of action for the revenue integrity professional? Option A. Suggests that the revenue integrity team focus its efforts on lower-value services where audits are less likely, allowing the current billing practice for high-value procedures to continue. Option B. Advocate for immediate correction of all billing to accurately reflect the documented services and assigned codes, regardless of potential payer scrutiny, and implement a proactive strategy for managing payer audits. Option C. Recommend a review of payer contracts to identify specific clauses that might justify the current billing practice, even if it means not billing for all potentially reimbursable services. Option D. Advise the billing team to continue the current practice of underbilling high-value procedures to minimize payer scrutiny and maintain a consistent revenue stream. The correct answer is B. Advocate for immediate correction of all billing to accurately reflect the documented services and assigned codes, regardless of potential payer scrutiny, and implement a proactive strategy for managing payer audits. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a revenue integrity professional to navigate conflicting priorities between immediate financial gain and long-term compliance and patient care. The pressure to meet financial targets can tempt individuals to overlook or rationalize non-compliant practices. Careful judgment is required to ensure that revenue maximization strategies are ethically sound and legally defensible. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes accurate documentation and coding as the foundation of revenue integrity. This aligns with the core principles of the Certified Revenue Integrity Professional (CRIP) designation, which emphasizes adherence to regulatory frameworks like the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services (CMS) guidelines and the False Claims Act. By ensuring that services rendered are accurately documented and coded, the organization avoids overpayments, underpayments, and potential fraud and abuse investigations. This approach fosters a culture of compliance, protects the organization's reputation, and ensures sustainable revenue generation based on legitimate services provided. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing reimbursement without verifying documentation and coding accuracy is ethically and regulatorily flawed. This could lead to billing for services not rendered, upcoding services to higher reimbursement levels without medical necessity, or failing to capture all billable services, all of which can constitute fraud and abuse under federal law, specifically the False Claims Act. Such practices can result in significant financial penalties, recoupment of overpayments, exclusion from federal healthcare programs, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that involves ignoring potential documentation deficiencies to avoid disrupting the revenue cycle is also problematic. Efficiency is important. Overlooking critical compliance issues creates a significant risk. This passive approach can allow systemic problems to persist, increasing the likelihood of future audits and penalties. It fails to uphold the professional responsibility to identify and correct issues that compromise revenue integrity and compliance. Finally, an approach that involves selectively reporting revenue based on payer preference rather than accurate coding and documentation is a direct violation of regulatory requirements. Reimbursement should be based on the services provided and the applicable coding and billing rules, not on what a specific payer might prefer to pay. This can lead to underreporting revenue or misrepresenting services, both of which are non-compliant and can have serious consequences. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the revenue cycle, starting with patient registration and continuing through billing and collections. Key steps include: 1. Understanding the relevant regulatory landscape, e.g., CMS guidelines, HIPAA, False Claims Act. 2. Implementing robust internal controls for documentation, coding, and billing. 3. Conducting regular audits and reviews to identify and address compliance gaps. 4. Prioritizing education and training for all staff involved in the revenue cycle. 5. Establishing clear escalation paths for identified issues and ensuring prompt corrective action. 6. Maintaining open communication with all stakeholders, including clinical staff, coders, billers, and compliance officers. Question 15. Compliance review shows that a major payer is proposing a new contract with revised reimbursement rates and specific documentation requirements for a high-volume service line. The proposed documentation requirements appear to be more stringent than current Medicare guidelines, and the reimbursement rates, while seemingly higher, are tied to a complex quality metric that is not clearly defined. Which of the following negotiation strategies best aligns with the principles of revenue integrity and regulatory compliance? Option A. Focus solely on negotiating the highest possible reimbursement rates, deferring any detailed review of documentation requirements or quality metrics until after the contract is signed. Option B. Negotiate for contract terms that clearly define the quality metrics and ensure that all proposed documentation requirements are consistent with or exceed current federal and payer guidelines, seeking clarification on any ambiguities before finalizing the agreement. Option C. Propose a unilateral change to internal documentation processes to meet the payer's new requirements without seeking formal clarification or approval from the payer to expedite the contract finalization. Option D. Accept the contract as proposed, assuming the higher reimbursement rates will offset any potential documentation challenges and that the payer's interpretation of quality metrics is standard. The correct answer is B. Negotiate for contract terms that clearly define the quality metrics and ensure that all proposed documentation requirements are consistent with or exceed current federal and payer guidelines, seeking clarification on any ambiguities before finalizing the agreement. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in revenue integrity, negotiating payer contracts that may not fully align with established billing and coding guidelines, potentially impacting reimbursement accuracy and compliance. The professional challenge lies in balancing the organization's financial needs with the imperative to adhere to all applicable federal and state regulations, including those governing Medicare and Medicaid billing. Careful judgment is required to identify and address discrepancies without jeopardizing payer relationships or violating compliance mandates. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, data-driven analysis of the proposed contract terms against current regulatory requirements and payer policies. This proactive stance ensures that any proposed changes or interpretations are vetted for compliance before acceptance, thereby mitigating risks of overpayments, underpayments, and audit findings. It demonstrates a commitment to accurate billing and revenue integrity, aligning with the core principles of the Certified Revenue Integrity Professional CRIP designation. This approach fosters a culture of compliance and supports sustainable financial health by ensuring reimbursement is earned and received in accordance with all governing rules. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing reimbursement without a corresponding compliance review fails to uphold the ethical and regulatory obligations of a revenue integrity professional. This could lead to accepting terms that implicitly or explicitly encourage non-compliant billing practices, resulting in potential False Claims Act violations, significant recoupments, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that involves unilaterally implementing billing changes based on contract interpretation without formal payer clarification or internal compliance approval risks misinterpreting contract language and violating payer policies or federal regulations. This can lead to claim denials, payment delays, and disputes. A third incorrect approach that involves accepting contract terms that are vague or ambiguous regarding payment methodologies without seeking clarification or proposing more precise language leaves the organization vulnerable to payer disputes and inconsistent reimbursement, undermining the goal of predictable and compliant revenue. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of all relevant payer policies, federal and state regulations, e.g., Medicare Conditions of Participation, HIPAA, False Claims Act, and internal billing and coding guidelines. This framework involves 1. Conducting a detailed comparative analysis of proposed contract terms against these established rules. 2. Identifying any potential conflicts or areas of ambiguity. 3. Consulting with internal compliance, legal, and billing departments to assess risks and develop negotiation strategies. 4. Seeking clarification from the payer on any unclear provisions. And 5. Negotiating contract terms that ensure accurate reimbursement while strictly adhering to all regulatory and ethical standards. Question 16. Benchmark analysis indicates that a significant increase in claim denials and recoupments from a major commercial payer is directly correlated with recent changes in their medical necessity review criteria, which were not proactively communicated to providers. Which of the following approaches best upholds revenue integrity and fosters a sustainable payer relationship? Option A. Initiate a formal appeal process for all denied claims, while simultaneously scheduling a meeting with payer representatives to discuss the new criteria and seek clarification on their interpretation and implementation. Option B. Increase internal claim scrubbing efforts to identify and correct potential errors before submission, assuming the payer's new criteria are overly stringent and the organization's current processes are otherwise compliant. Option C. Focus on maximizing revenue from other payers to offset potential losses from this payer, while passively waiting for the payer to provide further guidance on their updated review criteria. Option D. Temporarily halt all submissions to this payer until internal resources can be reallocated to thoroughly investigate the payer's new criteria and develop a comprehensive response strategy. The correct answer is A. Initiate a formal appeal process for all denied claims, while simultaneously scheduling a meeting with payer representatives to discuss the new criteria and seek clarification on their interpretation and implementation. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the organization's financial health with the need to maintain positive and compliant relationships with its payers. Revenue integrity is not solely an internal process. It is heavily influenced by external payer policies, audits, and communication. A breakdown in payer relations can lead to increased scrutiny, claim denials, recoupments, and ultimately, significant financial losses, directly impacting revenue integrity. The decision-maker must navigate complex payer requirements, potential disputes, and the internal processes that generate claims. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a proactive, collaborative, and data-driven strategy for managing payer relationships. By establishing clear communication channels, understanding payer policies, and actively participating in payer initiatives, the organization demonstrates a commitment to compliance and accurate billing. This approach aligns with the core principles of revenue integrity, which emphasize preventing errors and ensuring appropriate reimbursement through adherence to all applicable regulations and payer guidelines. Specifically, in the U.S. context for CRIP, this involves understanding and adhering to Medicare and Medicaid program integrity efforts, as well as commercial payer contracts and policies, all of which are subject to federal and state laws and regulations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on internal claim scrubbing without engaging payers fails to address the root causes of payer dissatisfaction or denial trends. This can lead to a false sense of security, as internal processes may not align with evolving payer expectations or specific contract terms. This approach risks increased denials and recoupments because it neglects the external perspective and the direct impact of payer policies on revenue. Ethically, it can be seen as a failure to exercise due diligence in managing external financial relationships. Another incorrect approach that involves retaliatory actions or ignoring payer audit findings is professionally unacceptable and carries significant regulatory risk. Such actions demonstrate a lack of respect for the payer's role in the healthcare ecosystem and can be interpreted as an attempt to circumvent compliance obligations. This can lead to escalated audits, sanctions, and potential exclusion from payer networks, directly undermining revenue integrity and violating principles of good business practice and regulatory compliance. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate revenue collection over addressing payer concerns can lead to short-term gains but long-term damage to payer relationships. This can result in increased claim rejections, delayed payments, and a perception of non-compliance, ultimately harming revenue integrity. It fails to recognize that sustainable revenue integrity depends on a foundation of trust and accurate, compliant billing practices that meet payer requirements. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of payer feedback, audit results, and denial trends. This includes 1. Gathering and analyzing data on payer-specific denial reasons and recoupment trends. 2. Establishing regular communication forums with key payers to discuss issues, clarify policies, and share best practices. 3. Proactively reviewing and updating internal processes to align with payer requirements and regulatory changes. 4. Developing a clear escalation process for addressing payer disputes or concerns. 5. Ensuring that all actions taken are documented and align with organizational policies and regulatory mandates. Question 17. Regulatory review indicates that a hospital department is consistently falling short of its monthly revenue targets. The department manager suggests that, to improve performance, the charge entry staff should proactively identify opportunities to add ancillary charges that are often associated with the primary procedures being billed, even if those ancillary services are not explicitly documented in the physician's operative report or progress notes for that specific encounter. The manager believes this approach will capture revenue that is likely being missed. Option A. Suggests that the charge entry staff use their best judgment to determine which ancillary charges are most likely to have been performed and add them to the claims to boost revenue. Option B. Implement the department manager's suggestion to add associated ancillary charges to improve revenue, as it is a common practice in some facilities to capture all potential revenue. Option C. Inform the department manager that while adding associated charges is not ideal, it can be done on a limited basis to meet revenue goals, provided it is not excessive. Option D. Advise the department manager that adding charges without explicit documentation supporting the service is a violation of federal healthcare regulations and could lead to significant penalties, and instead recommend a review of documentation practices to ensure all billable services are captured accurately and compliantly. The correct answer is D. Advise the department manager that adding charges without explicit documentation supporting the service is a violation of federal healthcare regulations and could lead to significant penalties, and instead recommend a review of documentation practices to ensure all billable services are captured accurately and compliantly. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the financial needs of a healthcare facility with the ethical and regulatory obligations to accurately capture charges for services rendered. The pressure to meet revenue targets can create an environment where subtle deviations from accurate charge capture might be considered, posing a significant risk to the organization's compliance and reputation. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions align with the Certified Revenue Integrity Professional CRIP principles and relevant U.S. federal regulations, particularly the False Claims Act and Medicare guidelines. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes accurate and compliant charge capture, even when faced with potential revenue shortfalls. This involves a thorough review of documentation and adherence to established coding and billing guidelines. It ensures that services are billed only when they are medically necessary, properly documented, and meet all payer requirements. This proactive and ethical stance minimizes the risk of overpayments, audits, and penalties, ultimately safeguarding the organization's financial integrity and its commitment to patient care. An incorrect approach that involves billing for services not rendered or upcoding services to increase reimbursement is a direct violation of federal healthcare fraud and abuse laws, including the False Claims Act. This constitutes a serious ethical failure and regulatory noncompliance, leading to severe penalties such as fines, exclusion from federal healthcare programs, and potential criminal prosecution. Another incorrect approach, such as ignoring documentation deficiencies to expedite billing, risks submitting inaccurate claims that do not reflect the actual services provided, thereby violating the principle of truthful billing and potentially leading to improper payments. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of all applicable regulations and payer policies. When faced with ambiguity or pressure, they should consult internal policies, seek guidance from compliance officers or legal counsel, and always err on the side of caution and accuracy. The core principle is to ensure that every charge submitted is supported by adequate documentation and accurately reflects the services provided to the patient. Question 18. The efficiency study reveals a significant increase in claim denials related to medical necessity documentation for a specific outpatient service. The Revenue Integrity Team is tasked with optimizing the revenue cycle process to address this. Which data analytics-driven approach best supports this objective while adhering to U.S. healthcare regulations? Option A. Immediately cease offering the affected service until the denial issue can be resolved, prioritizing financial risk mitigation over continued patient care. Option B. Focus on increasing the volume of the affected service to offset the financial impact of denials, assuming that a higher volume will naturally dilute the denial rate. Option C. Implement a blanket policy to automatically appeal all denials for the affected service, regardless of the specific reason, to maximize reimbursement potential. Option D. Implement a comprehensive review of all claims for the affected service, analyzing denial reasons, associated physician documentation, and payer policies to identify systemic documentation gaps or coding inaccuracies, and then develop targeted training and process improvements. The correct answer is D. Implement a comprehensive review of all claims for the affected service, analyzing denial reasons, associated physician documentation, and payer policies to identify systemic documentation gaps or coding inaccuracies, and then develop targeted training and process improvements. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a revenue integrity professional to leverage data analytics for process optimization within the complex and highly regulated U.S. healthcare revenue cycle. The challenge lies in identifying actionable insights from data that directly address inefficiencies, while ensuring compliance with U.S. federal regulations such as the False Claims Act, Stark Law, and Anti-Kickback Statute, as well as CMS guidelines. A misinterpretation of data or an improperly implemented optimization strategy could lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and patient harm. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it focuses on using data analytics to identify root causes of revenue cycle inefficiencies and then implementing targeted compliance solutions. This aligns with the core principles of revenue integrity, ensuring accurate billing, maximizing reimbursement, and preventing fraud, waste, and abuse. By analyzing denial trends, identifying documentation gaps, or pinpointing coding inaccuracies, the professional can propose systemic changes that improve accuracy and efficiency, thereby enhancing revenue integrity and ensuring compliance with payer rules and federal healthcare program requirements. This proactive, data-driven approach is essential for maintaining a healthy revenue cycle and upholding ethical standards in healthcare finance. Incorrect approaches fail to adequately consider the regulatory landscape or the root causes of the identified inefficiencies. One incorrect approach might involve implementing a quick fix based on superficial data trends, without understanding the underlying reasons for those trends. This could lead to wasted resources, unintended consequences, and continued noncompliance. For example, if denial data shows a spike in a particular service, a superficial fix might be to simply retrain coders without investigating if the denial is due to a lack of medical necessity documentation or a payer policy change. This would be a regulatory failure, as it doesn't address the true compliance issue, and an ethical failure, as it doesn't prioritize accurate patient care documentation. Another incorrect approach might be to focus solely on increasing throughput or reducing denial rates without a corresponding focus on accuracy and compliance. This could lead to aggressive billing practices that inadvertently violate regulations like the False Claims Act by submitting claims that are not supported by adequate documentation or are otherwise not medically necessary. This is a direct regulatory and ethical failure, as it prioritizes financial gain over compliance and patient well-being. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the data and its context within the revenue cycle. This involves not only identifying trends, but also investigating the root causes of those trends, considering all relevant U.S. federal and payer-specific regulations. The next step is to develop data-driven solutions that are both effective in optimizing processes and compliant with all applicable laws and guidelines. This requires collaboration with clinical, coding, and billing departments, as well as legal and compliance teams. Finally, continuous monitoring and evaluation of the implemented solutions are crucial to ensure ongoing effectiveness and compliance. Question 19. The performance metrics show a consistent pattern of identified Medicare overpayments across several service lines, with a significant portion of these overpayments being reported and returned to Medicare more than 60 days after initial identification. The Revenue Integrity Team is under pressure to reduce the backlog of identified overpayments and expedite the return of funds. What is the most appropriate course of action for the revenue integrity professional? Option A. Focus on denying future claims for services that have historically resulted in overpayments to prevent further financial leakage without formally addressing the previously identified overpayments. Option B. Immediately initiate the process to report and return all identified overpayments, prioritizing those with the largest dollar amounts. To demonstrate proactive compliance and financial recovery. Option C. Conduct a thorough investigation to confirm the existence, cause, and exact amount of each identified overpayment, and then report and return confirmed overpayments within 60 days of the date they were identified. Option D. Expedite the return of all identified overpayments by estimating the amounts and submitting a lump sum payment to Medicare, with a plan to reconcile the exact amounts later. The correct answer is B. Immediately initiate the process to report and return all identified overpayments, prioritizing those with the largest dollar amounts, to demonstrate proactive compliance and financial recovery. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a revenue integrity professional to balance the immediate financial implications of a potential overpayment with the complex and evolving regulatory landscape governing Medicare billing. The pressure to recover funds quickly must be tempered by a thorough understanding of the specific requirements for identifying, reporting, and returning overpayments under the False Claims Act and its associated regulations, particularly the 60-day rule. A hasty or incomplete approach risks not only failing to comply with these regulations, but also potentially incurring further penalties. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic and compliant process for addressing potential overpayments. This involves a thorough investigation to confirm the overpayment, accurate calculation of the amount, and timely reporting and return of the funds within the stipulated 60-day timeframe from the date the overpayment was identified. This aligns directly with the requirements of the Medicare Secondary Payer (MSP) statute and the Office of Inspector General's OIG guidance on self-disclosure, minimizing the risk of penalties and demonstrating a commitment to regulatory compliance. An incorrect approach that involves immediate refund without proper identification and quantification of the overpayment fails to adhere to the regulatory requirement of identifying the specific overpayment. This could lead to returning funds that were not actually owed, creating financial inefficiencies. Another incorrect approach, delaying the investigation and reporting beyond the 60-day window, directly violates the 60-day rule, exposing the organization to significant liability, including treble damages and per-claim penalties under the False Claims Act. Furthermore, an approach that focuses solely on recouping funds through aggressive denial of future claims without a formal overpayment identification and return process bypasses critical compliance steps and could be viewed as an improper collection method. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the relevant regulations, e.g., 42 CFR Section 401, 305, 42 CFR Section 411, 300 et sec., and the False Claims Act. This framework should involve 1. Establishing a robust internal process for identifying potential overpayments. 2. Conducting a thorough investigation to confirm the existence, cause, and amount of the overpayment. 3. Calculating the overpayment accurately. 4. Determining the date the overpayment was identified. 5. Reporting and returning the overpayment within 60 days of identification. And 6. Documenting all steps taken throughout the process. This systematic approach ensures compliance, mitigates risk, and upholds the integrity of the revenue cycle. Question 20. Implementation of a new service line requires the Revenue Integrity Team to ensure all claims submitted for this service are compliant with the billing guidelines of multiple payers, including Medicare, a large commercial insurer, and a regional Medicaid managed care organization. The team has access to the EHR system with its standard coding edits and a general understanding of Medicare billing rules. What is the most effective and compliant approach to manage these diverse payer-specific billing requirements? Option A. Establish a dedicated internal team responsible for continuously monitoring, interpreting, and disseminating payer-specific policy updates and guidelines to relevant departments, and developing internal protocols to ensure adherence. Option B. Address payer-specific billing requirements only when claims are denied. researching and correcting individual claim issues on a case-by-case basis. Option C. Rely on the EHR system's automated coding edits to flag potential errors, assuming that these edits encompass all necessary payer-specific requirements for accurate billing. Option D. Apply Medicare billing and documentation requirements universally to all payers, as these are generally considered the most stringent and comprehensive. The correct answer is A. Establish a dedicated internal team responsible for continuously monitoring, interpreting, and disseminating payer-specific policy updates and guidelines to relevant departments, and developing internal protocols to ensure adherence. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in revenue integrity, navigating the intricate and often evolving payer-specific billing requirements. The professional challenge lies in ensuring accurate claim submission that aligns with each payer's unique interpretation of coding guidelines, medical necessity documentation, and prior authorization protocols, all while maintaining compliance with federal regulations like the Medicare Conditions of Participation and HIPAA. Failure to do so can lead to claim denials, recoupments, audits, and significant financial and reputational damage. A correct approach, which involves establishing a dedicated team to continuously monitor and interpret payer policies, is best professional practice because it creates a systematic and proactive process for managing payer-specific requirements. This team's responsibility would include reviewing payer bulletins, policy updates, and provider manuals, and then translating this information into actionable billing and documentation guidelines for the organization. This ensures that billing staff are equipped with the most current and accurate information, minimizing errors and maximizing compliant reimbursement. This approach directly supports the core principles of revenue integrity by focusing on accurate claim submission from the outset, thereby preventing downstream compliance issues and financial losses. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the electronic health record, EHR, system's built-in edits is professionally unacceptable. While EHR edits can catch some common errors, they are often not updated in real time with payer-specific nuances or may not fully capture the complexities of medical necessity documentation required by individual payers. This can lead to claims being submitted with insufficient documentation or incorrect coding according to a specific payer's rules, resulting in denials. Ethically, it represents a failure to exercise due diligence in ensuring compliance with contractual obligations to payers. Another incorrect approach, which is to only address payer-specific requirements when a claim is denied, is also professionally unacceptable. This reactive strategy is inefficient and costly. It leads to significant claim backlog, delayed reimbursement, and increased administrative burden for staff who must then research and correct denied claims. From a regulatory standpoint, it demonstrates a lack of proactive compliance and can signal to auditors a systemic weakness in revenue cycle management. It also fails to uphold the ethical obligation to submit accurate claims from the first submission. A third incorrect approach, which is to assume that Medicare billing requirements are universally applicable to all payers, is fundamentally flawed and professionally risky. While Medicare often sets a baseline for many regulations, commercial payers and other government programs, like Medicaid managed care, have their own distinct policies, coverage limitations, and documentation expectations. Relying solely on Medicare guidelines for all payers can lead to widespread claim rejections and potential fraud allegations if it results in billing for services not covered by a specific payer's policy. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of contractual agreements with non-Medicare payers and a failure to meet the specific terms of those agreements. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a commitment to a proactive, systematic, and well-resourced approach to revenue integrity. This includes 1. Establishing clear ownership and responsibility for monitoring payer requirements. 2. Investing in resources, staff, technology, training to effectively manage this information. 3. Developing robust internal processes for policy interpretation and implementation. And 4. Fostering a culture of continuous improvement and compliance throughout the revenue cycle.